Well, welcome everyone to this webinar on combating lies about gender and sexuality. For those of you who I haven't met before, my name is Elizabeth Urbanowicz and I run Foundation Worldview, which is a ministry that is dedicated to helping equip Christian adults with the skills that they need to get the kids in their care to carefully evaluate every idea they encounter so they can understand the truth of the biblical worldview. And we know that one of the areas in which we really need to make sure that we are grounding our children is understanding gender and sexuality, because right now those two concepts are just front and center in our culture, and what is being pushed front and center are just lies. And so today we're going to explore how can we combat these lies that our children are going to be faced with, no matter whether they're in public school or whether they're homeschooled, that these lies are just surrounding us in our culture. Well, those of you who are familiar with me and my background know that I spent the first decade of my professional career as an elementary educator at a Christian school just outside of Chicago. And one thing I loved about this Christian school is they really sought to be developmentally appropriate and look at how has God designed the child mind to learn and what do children need actually to learn well. And one of the things that they were great at is in the grades in third grade on down, children actually had 2 times of recess. So there was a morning recess and then an afternoon recess, which is just so good for kids to get out and get their bodies moving. And I loved that about this school. Well, the school was located just outside of Chicago, which meant that for most of January, February, and part of March, it was actually too cold to go outside. That we had a rule that if it was above 17 degrees, you could take the kids outside. If it was below 17 degrees, you had to stay inside. And there were many days where it was below 17 degrees. So I just started buying, different activities that my kids could do inside, different toys and games and things, so that if we had indoor recess, they could still do some things that would get their bodies moving and that they would have fun. And one of the things that I decided to purchase were Legos, because especially kids 8 and 9 years old, they just love Legos. However, the problem that I had is I had, a small classroom budget every year. I think I got $500 a year, which is better than many schools, but still isn't a whole ton. And so, getting enough Legos for anywhere from 20 to 28 kids to play with at one time is a lot of Legos. And so I did a little research, and rather than spending several $100s on Legos, I found on Amazon that I could actually buy a knockoff version of Lego, and I could get over 2,000 of these little knockoff Lego bricks for under $50. And I thought, wow, what a great deal. So I ordered them and they came, and I told my students, I was like, I'm so excited. We got, some new activities for indoor recess. We got Legos, and I showed them the buckets where I had placed them. And then, during recess time, I let them play, with whatever games or toys they wanted to. And a whole bunch of kids chose to play with the Legos. Well, halfway through that first recess, one of the children came up to my desk and said, Miss you said you were going to buy us Legos. And I said, yes, they're over there. And the young man said, those are not Legos. And he held up one of the bricks and he turned it over and he evaluated the bottom of the brick and showed me how what I had purchased was vastly different than the structure of an actual Lego. And I said, you know what? You're right. These are not the Lego brand bricks. These are another brand that kind of look like Legos. But I loved how this young man had spent so much time immersed playing with actual Legos that when he was presented with a counterfeit, he was able to recognize it right away. And I think that this story is helpful as we think about what we need to do to prepare our children to face the many lies about gender and sexuality that they are going to encounter in culture. That we must first train them to recognize the truth of God's good design before we prepare them to reject the counterfeit. To put it another way, we have to be proactive at laying out a positive biblical theology rather than simply being reactive and waiting until the children in our care encounter a deviation from God's good design. Because if we wait to be reactive and we wait until our children see something, what's going to happen is their first understanding of gender and sexuality is going to be negative, because we're going to have to do backtracking from what they just encountered. And even if we homeschool our children, and we use very conservative curriculums and we're very careful about what they encounter on screens, they are still going to encounter deviations from God's good design. The school that I taught at was located just outside of Wheaton, Illinois. And for those of you who don't know, Wheaton is kind of like the mecca of Christianity within the United States. There's a flagship evangelical university there, Wheaton College, and then there's tons of evangelical organizations that are located right in the heart of Wheaton. So Wheaton is a very Christian community. In the neighborhood where I lived, most of the people in my development were Christians, and not just by name, Christians that actively went to church. There was tons of homeschooling families, tons of families that sent their kids to Christian schools, tons of men and women who had served as missionaries or for other Christian organizations. Yet right before I moved from Wheaton, Illinois, the house next door to the house where I lived was sold. And it was purchased by two women who were in a relationship and had adopted children. And I thought, as I left, wow, all of these families in my development are now, like it or not, are going to have to explain to their children what is going on, even if their children are 3 and 4 years old, because they're going to encounter their neighbors. And we know that we're called to love our neighbors. So we need to change the mindset of being reactive to being one that is proactive. So what we're going to do over the next 45 minutes is we're going to look at 3 common lies that our children will encounter about gender and sexuality. What we're then going to do is we're going to identify what is the root of this lie. Then we're going to outline the biblical truth and talk about how can we ground our children in this biblical truth. And then we're going to explore what can we do then after we've grounded them in the biblical truth to combat that lie. So the first of the 3 lies that we're going to look at, lie number 1, is that gender is a choice. I'm sure that nobody is surprised to hear this lie because we hear it all the time. It's all around us. It's in the media all the time. And we know that many, even who claim the name of Christ, have bought in to such a lie. So the first thing we need to do is think, okay, if we want our children to understand that this is a lie, that this is not the truth, what is the root of this lie? Where does this lie stem from? Well, the root of the lie that gender is a choice is that there is no design and therefore no purpose. I'll say that again. The root of this lie is there is no design and therefore no purpose. That if someone buys into this lie that gender is a choice, this person is believing the lie that we as humans create our own identities and our own purpose. That there is no purpose and there is no design. So we want to make sure we first understand the root of this lie, that if we believe that gender is a choice, the root of this lie is that there is no design and therefore no purpose. Where the truth that combats that lie is that God is our designer, and knowing and following his design is always best. So then how do we ground our children in this truth? What do we do? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through what we cover here at Foundation Worldview in our next upcoming curriculum, our God's Good Design curriculum. This is a curriculum that's coming out for children ages 4+, so roughly ages 4 to 8, where we're seeking to ground them in a biblical understanding of identity, gender, sexuality, marriage, and family. So what we do in our God's Good Design curriculum is we start off by directly teaching children to recognize design. Okay, because if we want to combat this lie that gender is a choice, they first have to understand that there is design. And so first what we do in this curriculum is we just show them different pictures of things. We'll show them a picture of a bicycle, or we'll show them a picture of just a mud puddle, or we'll show them a picture of a refrigerator, and we'll have them identify which of these pictures show design, which of these pictures show a purposeful plan, so that they just practice recognizing design. And you can do this with your children. And then as you're driving in the car, and you're passing trees and flowers and birds and cars and humans and houses, you can talk about, okay, what things that we see right now out of our window show design. You can turn it into a game and have them play a game, because basically everything you see, almost everything you see out of your car window will show design, that there's a purposeful plan. Then the next thing that we do in that curriculum is that we help kids recognize that their bodies and their minds show design. We give them amazing facts about different systems in their body and different things that their mind can do. Then we say, does this show just an accident, Or does this show a purposeful plan? And so we want to ground them in the understanding that just a basic look at our bodies and our minds show that they have this incredible design. Then we want to talk through, okay, what happens when a designer's design is not followed? So you can do this by taking any object in your house. You could pick up your phone and say, okay, what happens if we decided that rather than use this phone to talk and to other people, and rather than use it for the GPS in our car, we wanted to use this phone as a frisbee? What would happen? Okay, and talk about that. Well, the phone is not going to go as far as a frisbee because it wasn't designed to be flung in the air. What could happen to the phone? Well, the phone might actually get broken. We might fling it against the house or against a fence. Or what happens if we accidentally fling it into a pond? Oh my goodness, if you fling a frisbee into a pond, you can grab it out and wash it off. With a phone, there's no going back. So you can talk about how when the designer's design is not followed, the object is not used for its purpose, and it ends up getting hurt and hurting others. One of the analogies that we give for this in our God's Good Design curriculum is we have the kids look at a picture of a kite and we say, okay, what is the purpose of this kite? Well, the purpose of this kite is to be flown in the wind, for someone to let it go in the wind and to hold on to the string and to have fun flying this kite in the air and to see the beautiful colors and the tail, waving in the wind. And then we say, well, what if I took this kite and I decided to use it as a towel? What if I washed my hair and then I took this kite and I wrapped my hair up in it and used it as a towel? What would happen? Well, my hair would not get as dry as if I were using a towel, because towels are designed to absorb water, where kites were not designed that way. And then what would happen to the kite? Well, it would get all wet and soggy. And would we be able to use the kite then according to its purpose if it's limp and wet and soggy? No. So the kite would miss out on flying high in the air. We would miss out on getting to have the kite fly in the air and enjoying the beauty of it in the wind. And my hair would still be wet. And so we talk about, okay, if we don't know and follow the designer's design, we miss out on the purpose that object was designed for. Then the next thing that we can do with our kids, the next thing we do in that curriculum is we take them right to Genesis 1, verse 27, which talks about God creating humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And we ask them, okay, what truths does this verse reveal about God, our designer's design for us? Well, these verses reveal two truths. One, they reveal that all humans are made in God's image. And two, they reveal that all humans are either designed as male or female. And so then we can ask the question, okay, so according to God, our designer, who knows our design, do we get to choose whether we are male or female? Or is that already chosen for us by the designer? Well, that's already chosen for us by the designer. And this is where some people might get really uncomfortable doing this. But this is important, especially for parents to do this. I don't think that church leaders or educators should do this. This part would be distinctly the role of the parents, to actually explain, how do we figure out whether we are male or female? And we actually explain this in our God's Good Design curriculum. We say the truth about being male or female is revealed by our bodies. And the simple way that we explain it to even 4-year-olds is we say, think about when you go to the beach. There's special parts of your body that are always covered, even when they're at the beach. And those special parts of your body actually reveal whether you are a girl or a boy. And we say, if you're a boy, that special part of your body is called your penis. And if you are a girl, that special part of your body is called your vagina. And these special parts of us, they reveal the truth of whether God designed us as a boy or as a girl. So we want to lay this positive biblical theology that being distinctly male or being distinctly female is rooted in God's good design for us. And even before we do that, that's why we build up the concept of design and purpose in design, and designers knowing and understanding their design best, so that even from a young age, our kids are grounded in the understanding God is my designer. He understands my design. His design is best, and it is best for me when I know and follow that design. Well, then to prepare them to encounter this lie that gender is a choice, we then need to show them how scripture reveals that sin corrupts God's good design. And we can take them right to Romans 5 that talks about, through one man came sin, which brought forth death. And so that they understand that sin can corrupt God's good design. The way that we explain it in simple terms in our God's good design curriculum, we do introduce the word corrupt, but we say corrupt means to ruin or to destroy. And so when Adam and Eve sin, and then that sin and death spread to all people, that sin corrupts, it ruins or destroys God's good design. And the way we want to show our kids that this happens, particularly in regards to gender, is that because of sin, our feelings can trick us. I'll say that again. Because of sin, our feelings can trick us. And so what you can do with the children God has placed in your care is you can talk about, okay, let's play a game. Let's talk about someone either following their feelings, either pointing them to the truth, or their feelings tricking them. And you can talk about, someone feeling like they should be kind to their brother. Is that feeling pointing them to the truth, or is it tricking them? Well, that feeling is pointing them to the truth that they are to treat their brother like an image bearer. And then you can talk about someone, hitting their little sister, being angry with their sister and hitting her. Is that feeling pointing them towards the truth, or is it tricking them? And well, that feeling is tricking them. And then you can go into examples and say, just give a random name. Tim's body is a boy's body. He really likes spending time with his friends who are girls. And eventually he starts to believe that he is a girl. Are Tim's feelings pointing him towards the truth, or are they tricking him? Those feelings are tricking him. And in that curriculum, we actually use the exact wording that Rosaria Butterfield suggests that you use when talking with little kids about transgenderism, that it's feelings of jealousy. It's wanting what God has not given us. And we say, no, that person's feelings of jealousy have tricked them into thinking that they're a girl when they're actually a boy. And so this way, when our children encounter, whether it's on an ad that pops up on the TV or on YouTube, whether it's in a show, whether it's on the playground, whether it's at soccer practice or ballet practice or at school, whenever they encounter someone who is one gender presenting themselves as another gender, it's not something that's super confusing for them. It's not something that they're going to just be super curious about. They're going to already have that paradigm in their mind. The truth is, God, our designer, created us as male or female, and his design is good. But because of sin, sometimes feelings trick us. Okay, I hope you see that through this, if we help ground our little ones in the biblical truth of God's good design, and then expose them to corruptions for that design, they're going to already have the paradigm in their mind for what is going on when they encounter these lies in culture. So that's the first lie. Lie number one, gender is a choice. Lie number two, which I'm sure everyone watching and listening is familiar with, is that love is love. We hear this all the time. We see signs on people's yards. We see it written on t-shirts. We see, especially during the month of June, but starting, a few years ago, starting most months, we see stores advertising this all the time. Love is love. So the first thing we need to think, okay, what is the root of this lie? Well, the root of this lie is that all love is sexual. That our culture views all types of love merely as sexual desire. And, sadly, some even within the Christian community, those who claim the name of Christ, get this confused as well. I've heard many times from different teachers confusing the story of David and Jonathan's deep and abiding friendship love. They twist that to make it look as if David and Jonathan were lovers, where scripture gives us no indication of that. And if it did, based on everything else the scriptures say about homosexuality, it would have been condemned. So this lie, love is love, the root of it is the belief that all love simply boils down to sexual desire. Where the truth is, God designed different types of love for different relationships. I have a different love for my parents than I have for my friends. And my friends who are married, they have a different type of love for their spouse than they have for their children, than they have for their friends. God designed different kinds of love for different relationships. So how do we ground our children in this truth? Well, what we do in God's good design is we give them a picture. We show them different types of shoes and we say, okay, there are many different types of shoes. We show them a sandal, we show them a sneaker, and we say, okay, when you are going to be running somewhere, or you're going to be doing basketball or soccer, or you're running around the track, what type of shoe do you put on? That's right, you put on a sneaker or a tennis shoe. Why? Because that type of shoe was designed to protect your foot while you are running. Then we say, why don't you wear your sneakers though when you go to the beach? Well, because sneakers weren't designed to go in the water and they weren't designed to go in the sand because they would just trap hot sand in them. And then they get all soggy when they go in the water and they don't dry out really quickly. So we say, what kind of shoe do you use when you're at the beach? That's right, you use a sandal. Why do you use a sandal? Because sandals are open. They were designed to be able to let in sand and let out the sand. And most sandals, if they get wet, they dry pretty quickly. So we talk about there's different types of shoes for different activities. And then we draw the parallel. We say that God created different kinds of love for different relationships. Now, there are several different types of love, and theologians, disagree whether there's 3 loves or 4 loves or 5 loves. But what we do with kids, we can just explain 3 simple types of love. And we can say God designed several different types of love. And 3 types of love that you see every day are friendship love, marriage love, and family love. And then just brainstorm with kids and say, okay, who are some of your friends? Who are some of your best friends? And brainstorm a list of friends. If you want, you can even pull up pictures, talk about things you appreciate about those friends. What are the types of things you do together? Why are they your good friends? And then talk about how friends are a gift from God. Friendship love is a gift from God. And then you can talk with your kids and say, you know what? Can you only have one friend? No. Can you only have 2 friends? No. You can have as many friends as God brings your way. And then say, can you only be friends with people who are girls? No. Can you only be friends with people who are boys? No. You can be friends with girls and boys. And then talk about, do your friends all have to be your same age? No, you can have friends who are your age. You can have friends who are older. You can have friends who are younger. And then talk with your kids and say, we can share friendship love with almost anyone. Okay, we can share friendship love with almost anyone. That's the type of love God has given us for friends, and it is a good gift. Then say, okay, I want you to think of who are some married couples that you know? And then list different married couples that you know and talk through, yes, we know Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. Yes, you're right. Mommy and daddy are married. Yes, Pastor and Mrs. So-and-so are married. Talk through all the different married couples that you know. And then talk about how marriage is different than friendship. We can share friendship love with almost anyone, but marriage is just for 2 people in one marriage, one man and one woman. Now we're going to cover this more in depth as we go through lie number 3, but just at the outskirt, you can talk about marriage love is different than friendship love. Marriage love is just between one man and one woman. And then you can compare and contrast it with friendship love and say, you know what? Some of our friends, we're going to have them friends our whole lives. Some of our friends, they're just going to be friends when we live next door to one another, or they're just going to be friends, like when we're in school together. But marriage love is different. When one man and one woman come together to get married, they make a promise that they are going to stay together their whole lives until they die. And then, or I should say, not until they both die, until one of them dies. And then they are making a promise that they are not going to share their marriage love with anyone else. And it's not like that in friendship. We can share friendship love with many people, but marriage is just one man and one woman who commit to stay together for their whole lives. And then you can talk about family love and say, God has also given us family love. What are some families that you know, and name different families that you know, who's in the family, fun things that you enjoy doing with that family. And then say, yes, God has also given us family love. And family love is a mom and it's a dad and children. And then talk about how families take care of one another and talk about how it's different than marriage love, because in family love, you can have more than just two people. And then we want to give our kids an even bigger picture and say that family love actually points to the one eternal family, God's family. So when we go to church, those are our brothers and sisters in God's family. And then we want to celebrate the goodness of these different types of love and say, isn't it so kind of God to give us these different types of love, that he has given us friendship love and marriage love and family love. And just like different types of shoes are created for different types of situations, God has given us these different types of love for different types of relationships. It's a great thing that you can celebrate. Then we want to bring it back once we've laid this positive biblical foundation. We want to bring it back to the concept of sin, that sin corrupts God's good design. And the way that we explain this type of corruption in our God's good design curriculum is we say, because of sin, we can confuse different types of love. And so in that curriculum, we give the kids different examples. We give them examples of different of people who are sharing different types of love. And we say, are they sharing the type of love as God designed it? Or are they confusing the different types of love? So we'll give an example of a brother and sister caring for one another and taking care of one another. And we'll say, does this reflect God's design for this type of love? Or does it confuse a different type of love? This reflects God's design. God gave us family love so that brothers and sisters would care for one another. Then we give them an example, of one man and one woman making a promise before their families and their friends and God that they'll love one another, stay one another, start a family together. Does this align with God's good design for this type of love, or does it confuse different types of love? This aligns with God's good design. Then we'll give an example of two men who really care about one another, and they decide they want to care for one another their whole lives. And so they decide that they're going to get married. Does this align with God's good design for love, or does it confuse different types of love? And we talk about how this actually confuses different types of love, that two different men can be designed for friendship love, but not for marriage love. And we do this with a whole host. We give them tons of positive examples and tons of examples where people are confusing different types of love. And you can do this with your kids. Just talk about different types of love that align with God's design for that type of love, and then areas where humans have confused different kinds of love. So that is lie number 2, that love is love. Now we are going to move into lie number 3. Just a few reminders before we do so. If you have a question about anything I've said or anything that I haven't said, the correct place to put that is not the general chat. Don't put your question in the general chat because it's going to be too hard for Jonathan to look through that and pass it along to me. Instead, put it in the questions tab. Second thing, if you are listening to these different activities that I'm describing and you're thinking that you're interested in looking into our God's Good Design curriculum, which is being released this summer, our next webinar is actually a preview webinar where we're going to walk you step by step through the curriculum, everything that's involved, how you can use it with your kids to ground them in a biblical understanding of God's good design for identity, gender, sexuality, marriage, and family. And that webinar is taking place at noon Central on Thursday, May 9th. So if you do check the general chat, Jonathan is going to put a link to that webinar so you can register for that. Okay, lie number 3. Lie number 3 is any two people can make up a marriage. Where this is related to the lie love is love, but this is taking it a step further and not just saying that two people should be able to love whoever they want. It's saying that any two people can make up a marriage. So with this lie, just as we did with the other two, we need to look at, okay, what is the root of this lie? And the root of this lie is that marriage is primarily a cure for loneliness. Now, for those of you who are married, you know that in some ways marriage can help you not feel so alone. Those of you who are married also know that marriage is not a catch-all cure for loneliness. But the root of this lie is that marriage is primarily a cure for loneliness. And this was highlighted actually in the 2015 Obergefell versus Hodges decision that the US Supreme Court made same-sex marriage legal in all 50 states. And so I'm going to read just two sections that Justice Kennedy read at the end of that case to sum up what had happened. And the first quote Justice Kennedy read said, "Marriage responds to the universal fear that a lonely person might call out only to find no one there. It offers the hope of companionship and understanding and assurance that while both still live, there will be someone to care for the other." Okay, now this isn't a complete lie. Marriage does in some ways, ensure that two people will have someone by their side. But what's being said in this quote is that marriage primarily is responding to the universal fear of loneliness. So that was the first quote. Second quote at the end, right before Justice Kennedy read the decision that the Supreme Court was going to legalize same-sex marriage. This is what he said. "No union is more profound than marriage, for it embodies the highest ideals of love, fidelity, devotion, sacrifice, and family. In forming a marital union, two people become something greater than once they were. As some of the petitioners in these cases demonstrate, marriage embodies a love that may endure even past death. It would misunderstand these men and women to say they disrespect the idea of marriage. Their plea is that they do respect it so deeply that they seek to find its fulfillment for themselves. Their hope is not to be condemned to live in loneliness, excluded from one of civilization's oldest institutions. They ask for equal dignity in the eyes of the law. The Constitution grants them that right." And so here it's very clear, Justice Kennedy is saying that those who are petitioning to get married to someone of the same sex were not wanting to be condemned to live in loneliness. So that quote highlights this lie that marriage is primarily a cure for loneliness. And sadly, many even within the church, many who claim the name of Christ have bought into this lie as well. Many Christians get confused on this because of an incorrect understanding of Genesis 2:18. And in Genesis 2:18, that's where it says, "God said that it was not good that the man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him." Now, God did not say it is not good that man should be lonely. Adam was already in perfect, loving communion with God. Adam was not lonely. What was he lacking? He was alone. He was lacking a helper who was fit for him. And what does that mean? Well, to understand that, we have to look at the context of Genesis 2 more fully. What had just been revealed in Genesis 1? Well, in Genesis 1:28, it says that God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it." So man's primary command was to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Adam was alone without any helper to fulfill this command. Adam could not procreate on his own. So God made Eve so that Adam could fulfill this command. Now, is marriage good relationally? Absolutely. Does it cure some of the loneliness that humans living on this side of Genesis 3 feel? Yes, it does, but God did not design marriage primarily to be a cure for loneliness. And I think that any of you who are married, who are watching or listening, who went into marriage thinking, this is my ticket out of loneliness, I'm pretty sure that at some point in your marriage, you realized that that was a false hope, that we feel lonely, not because we are without other people, but because sin separates us from God and from one another. And as we are reconciled in our relationship to God, and through that reconciliation, then reconciled in our relationship to one another, we are less lonely. But until we see Jesus face to face, we all are going to be dealing with some loneliness, because that is the curse of sin. So the truth that we want to make sure that our children see is that marriage is not primarily a cure for loneliness. God designed marriage to be one man and one woman becoming one flesh for life. And marriage is a living, breathing picture of Christ and the church. It's a picture of the gospel. So I'll say those two things again. We want to ground our kids in this truth that God designed marriage to be one man and one woman becoming one flesh for life. And marriage is a picture of Christ and the church. It's a visible picture of the gospel. So then how do we ground our children in this truth? Well, first we can just take them, to the Bible that talks about in Genesis chapter 2 that talks about, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And then that's quoted again in Ephesians chapter 5 to help them see that marriage is this one flesh union. In our God's Good Design curriculum, we directly teach this truth to the children, and we have them repeat it, that marriage is one man and one woman becoming one flesh for life, and have them practice it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And then in the next lesson in that curriculum, we teach them the truth that's revealed in Ephesians chapter 5, where Paul outlines the responsibilities of a wife and the responsibilities of a husband. And then he says, this mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. And so then we teach the kids in that curriculum that marriage is a picture of Christ and the church. And the way you can do this with a little one is you can take out a picture, a family picture, and say, okay, who's in this picture? Especially it's easy if you do this, if you take out a picture of them and say, who's in this picture? That's right, it's you. That's a picture of you. And say, are you actually inside of that picture? Like, are you in there? No, you're right here with me, but that's a picture. That picture shows what you look like. And say, marriage isn't Jesus and the church, but marriage is a picture of it. That when husbands love their wives, they are showing how Jesus loves the church. When wives submit to their husbands, they are showing how the church submits to Jesus. We want to ground them in these two truths, that marriage is one man and one woman becoming one flesh for life, and marriage is a picture of Jesus and the church. So once they have that understanding, that's where we want to bring it back in again, tie it back in to sin corrupting God's good design. And the way we cover this in our God's Good Design curriculum is we say, because of sin, we often reject or ignore God's good design. And we actually do those motions. For reject, we push our hands away from our body. And for ignore, we cross our arms and turn our head to the side. And so we talk about how rejecting is like if somebody were to offer you a gift and say, here's this gift, and you just pushed it away and said, no, I don't want it. Ignoring is if somebody said, here's a gift, and you just turned your head and pretend you didn't hear them. And so to introduce our kids to these two words, reject and ignore. And then to say, because of sin, we often reject and ignore God's good design. And now we don't want to just put the examples on sexuality, because all of us are sinners. Homosexuality or transgenderism or any other deviant form of sexuality out there, those are not the only forms of sin out in the world or in the human heart, that we all have sin. So you can give examples of, okay, is this following God's good design or rejecting and ignoring it? And then you can say, a brother steals his brother's truck. Is that following God's good design, or is it rejecting and ignoring it? Well, that's rejecting and ignoring it. It's not following God's good design to love that brother like he's an image bearer, and then talk about, somebody's mom asked them to set the table when they just want to be playing, but they set the table anyway. Is that following God's good design or rejecting and ignoring it? That's following God's good design. Then you can give other examples. One man and one woman decide that they are going to get married, and they make a promise that they're going to stay together for their life and love one another in a way that they don't love anyone else. Is this following God's good design or rejecting and ignoring it? It's following God's good design. Or you can give the example, of two women decide that they want to get married and spend their whole lives together and adopt children. Is this following God's good design, or is it rejecting and ignoring it? This is rejecting and ignoring it, because God designed marriage to be one man and one woman becoming one flesh for life. And he designed it to be a picture of Christ and the church, not a picture of Christ and Christ, or not a picture of the church and the church. And so we can give examples like this to our kids to help them think through, where are times we see people following God's good design, and where are times we see people rejecting or ignoring it. And we also want to make sure that they understand that this rejecting and ignoring, it's in all human hearts. It's not just, somewhere out there with like lots of bad people, because the truth is we are all bad in that we do not follow God's law perfectly. That's why we need Jesus. And we want our kids to understand this, that everything that we teach them, as we ground them in the biblical truth, as we prepare them to reject cultural lies, that they are fixing their eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our not of our faith, of our faith, and that they are trusting in him. And that's what we want for our kids. Well, we are going to transition now into a time of questions. So if you have already put your question in the chat, we'll get to as many as we can. If you have not yet put your question in the chat, please go ahead. Did I just say the chat? I'm sorry. Put it in the questions tab. Don't put it in the chat. Put it in the questions tab, and we will get to as many as we can. Okay, let's see. First question. What do you say if the kid's parents are divorced in many of the marriage examples provided? Yes, so that is actually something that we do cover in God's good design. We talk about how, sin corrupts God's good design. And one of those corruptions is because of sin, marriages don't always last forever. And so we actually give examples of that. And one thing, it's really important, whether you're teaching your kids, about other people who are divorced or whether you yourself are divorced, it's really important for our kids that they know that it is not their fault, that there's nothing they could have done or not done that would have changed this, that this is a result of living in a fallen world. It is not their fault. So that's something that's really important. That's something we do in the God's Good Design curriculum, make sure that they know that it is not their fault. So what I would encourage you to do, as you're thinking of examples of married couples, just try to steer your kids towards couples that that are married. If you're in a community where 90% of the people that are divorced, take it to the Bible. Say, who are some couples that we know in the Bible who were married? Well, we know Adam and Eve were married. We know Sarah and Abraham were married. We know that Isaac and Rebecca were married. Ruth and Boaz were married. You can talk about couples in the Bible, because when you're first grounding kids in the truth, you don't want to start off talking about deviations from God's good design. You first just want to start off grounding them in the truth. And then when they have a solid understanding of that truth, then you can introduce the concept that sin corrupts God's good design. If you're interested in more information on this, we actually have 2 different podcasts at Foundation Worldview that outline how to talk with kids about divorce. So if you go to foundationworldview.com, we have a little search feature up in the top right-hand corner of our webpage. Just type in the word divorce and those podcasts will pop up. And that will be a much more robust answer on how to talk to kids about divorce than I'm able to give in a few minutes on this webinar. Okay, next question. My daughter's school psychologist, a biological female, wants my daughter to call her Mr. So-and-so. I told her that she can just call her teacher. Is this the wisest thing to do, or is there any better alternative? Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the response that you gave her to just say teacher is fine, because I know that I don't know how old your daughter is, but I know that when I taught 3rd grade, there were times when my students would just say teacher, and they raise their hand and say teacher. If she's in middle school, I don't know if that's appropriate anymore at middle school or the high school level, but definitely at the elementary school level, it is. So I think that that's a really wise thing to do. Would also just be making sure that you're having intentional conversations with your daughter about these things, because if she on a weekly basis is being submitted under the authority of someone who is upholding transgender ideology, there's going to be so much reformative work that you're going to need to do. Because even if she's just talking with a psychologist, about things that are helping her in school, her worldview is being formed because she is in a position of being submitted under the authority of this person who is upholding transgenderism. So you're going to want to make sure that you are grounding her in the biblical worldview. You're having these conversations. Also, another thing that you're going to want to make sure that you're going to do is you're going to want to make sure that you're speaking positively in some ways about this person and recognizing some of the good things about her. so that your daughter doesn't think that if this person is nice to her, that that means she has to buy into the transgender ideology. So a question that I would ask in this situation is, saying, with Miss So-and-so, or with, I don't even know what you call this person when you're talking with your daughter. How do you see God's image in her? And talk about how she's very kind to the students that she works with. And that reflects God's heart in there, that, like that's God's image in her. Talk about the way that she interacts with the parents, talk about the type of questions that she asks, talk about how she desires to help others. These are all things that reflect God's image in her. And then talk through, okay, how did God design her? In his image, how did God design her? He designed her as female. And so what's happening? Her feelings are tricking her into believing that she is a man. So the reason I would encourage this is because we don't want our kids to think that just because someone is nice to them, that means automatically everything about them is true and is good. We want our kids to be able to recognize that the image of God is in everyone, and we can appreciate that. We can be grateful for that, but we also have to recognize, where has sin corrupted our desires? Where has it corrupted our feelings? Where has it corrupted our thoughts? Where has it corrupted our actions, so that our kids can discern between the two? I do not know if this is a question coming in from the United States or coming in from another country. But one thing I would encourage you to do, I don't know your situation, so I'm going to give you advice. Take it with a grain of salt, and talk with those in your church about this. Talk about it with the elders at your church, those who know you and love you and care for you. But I would be really hesitant to put any child in a situation where they are under the authority of someone who is just so blatantly living a lie. I would really encourage you to think about, is this the best schooling option for your daughter? Is there another option, whether it's a Christian school or a co-op or homeschooling? And if finances are a situation, to just really pray, what would the Lord have you do? Because I've just seen God do some really amazing things when parents decide, they don't think it's wisest for their children to be in under the authority of those who are not submitting to God and his word, and God can provide in some pretty miraculous ways. So again, I don't know your situation, so take my advice with a grain of salt, but take it to the elders at your church to talk through and pray through. Okay, next question. How do we respond to the gotcha question that medically there are some people literally born with both male and female parts, albeit rare? I grew up with a friend like this in the 90s. It was not a choice, as this was God's design. Yes. So many people, even Christians, sometimes like to bring this up about someone who's a hermaphrodite, who is born with ambiguous genitalia. From all the reading that I've done, like you said, this is less than 0.1% of the population. So it is very, very small. And also, from the reading I've done, now I'm not a medical doctor, so I cannot confirm this, but from all the reading that I've done, is that when someone is born like this, you can actually do genetic testing and you can see what the chromosomes are, for which is more dominant. What one question that I would ask, so, because I've had this said to me before. Actually, it was by a roommate who was a Christian, who, when I was talking about this concept, was just like, well, what do you do with that? So what I would respond is, I would say, yeah, that's a really good question. So when you're bringing this up, is that, is that a normal, healthy genetic trait, or is that, do we consider that a deformity, like a genetic deformity? And to talk through that, how that is actually like a genetic deformity, and then say, okay, so do we make decisions for the entire population based on some kind of genes that are not healthy genes? Do we make decisions for the entire population on this? The answer is no, because when we think about anything that a child or a person struggles with, we want to make accommodations for them, to help them, to love them, but we don't make decisions for everyone else based on that small group of people. For example, think about when a child is born with autism. Do we want to make accommodations to help that child learn and grow and develop in as healthy a way as they can? Yes. But do we put those same boundaries and guidelines and restrictions on every single child in the population? No, we don't, because we focus in on that one child in the situation who's struggling with this, and we seek to meet their needs, but we don't make every other child in the situation conform to what we're doing for that child. Or similarly, if someone is blind, again, we want to have things that are going to help them live a happy, healthy, normal life, the things that we put in place. Do we make everyone else learn how to read Braille? Do we make everyone put in their houses, things that are going to assist those who are visually impaired? No, we don't do that because that doesn't apply to everyone. We do things that help that person. So we never use some kind of genetic deformity to make decisions for the rest of the population. So that's how I would respond to that question. Most people who are asking that question are not going to be in a place where they're actually going to listen to reason. So that's why I would, just respond with, oh, that's really interesting. So when you look at this, do you consider this as something that's biologically healthy? Or is this like a genetic mutation? To ask them that question, and then to ask, so, with all genetic mutations, do we use those genetic mutations to then make rules for the rest of the population? That might not be the 100% best answer. So I would continue to do research on that topic, but that here off the top of my mind, that's how I'd respond. Okay, many stories in the Bible involve men with multiple wives. How do you address this? Yeah, good question. If I was addressing this with kids, I'd say, okay, do we see anywhere in Scripture God setting up marriage as one man and multiple women? Do we see anywhere that is commanded? No, we don't. We see in the second chapter of Genesis, where it says that for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, or it says, therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And we see that repeated in Ephesians. We also see in the New Testament, okay, so when we have the full revelation, the full counsel of God's revelation, we see that the qualifications for an elder, both in Timothy and in Titus, are that the man can only have one wife. That's God's pattern. That's the goodness of God's design. That if you have a man that comes to Christ and he has multiple wives, he cannot be an elder because that is not God's design. We see that in Ephesians 5, the picture of Christ and the church. So I would just ask a child, I'd say, yes, we do see this. We see this a lot, don't we? We see it straight off in Genesis chapter 4. Lamech is bragging to his wives. He has more than one wife, and he's bragging to them about how he killed someone. Then we see, Jacob marries Leah and Rachel. And actually, one time when I was teaching this narrative to students, we were going through Scripture, one of the boys in my class, he groans and he goes, oh, and I said, what? And he goes, this is not going to turn out well. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he goes, my dad has enough trouble with my mom. I can't imagine if he had two of her. And so not that that's like the greatest analogy that we want to say, like, oh, having one wife is hard enough. But even that child, could see this is going to start causing some difficulty. And it's commanded in God's law in Deuteronomy that the king is not supposed to take multiple wives for himself that are going to turn his heart away from the Lord. So we just ask kids that question, do we ever see God command this? No. Do we ever see God forbid this? Yes. For those who are supposed to be examples in the church, they could not have more than one wife. We also see all of the commands in the New Testament about marriage are assuming one man and one woman. So that's how I would address that with kids. Okay, most of my ministry children were born to mothers who are unmarried. How can we talk about biblical marriage without shaming them or alienating them from their mothers? That's a good question. In these conversations, would really encourage you to have the parents present so the parents can help kids talk about these things. This is one area I think where we as a church, we kind of have a big blind spot that we just, in the 70s, churches just kind of took over the role of discipling children. They saw parents not doing it, so they just kind of took over, where now it's just normal for us to view kids ministry as the main discipling that kids are going to get. So would really encourage you to just have a time where you can have the parents in talking when you're talking with this about this with the kids so that they can help them understand this. Also, so in our God's Good Design curriculum, one of the things that we say is that, we're talking about divorce specifically, but we're talking about how, it's not always both people's faults. if somebody gets a divorce, a dad might decide that he doesn't want to be married anymore and he leaves the family, or a mom might decide she doesn't want to be married anymore and she leaves the family. So it's not putting blame on both of the people. Now you're talking about moms who are unmarried. And so this is like a little bit of a trickier situation in that I would just let scripture speak for itself, would just take them to the passages in Genesis chapter 2 talking about marriage, in Ephesians chapter 5 talking about marriage, and say, what is God's good design? And so putting the focus on God's good design, then some kids are going to then question, well, my dad isn't married to my mom, or I don't even know who my dad is, those kind of things. And we can say, you know what? Sin does corrupt God's good design, but immediately what you can do then, so you're not diving down deep into like how it's corrupted and how their family has been corrupted by sin, put the focus on the truth of eternity. This is something we do in the final lesson of God's good design. We say when Jesus returns, God's good design for us will last forever. And so that is where our ultimate focus is, that ultimately when Jesus returns, there will be no more sin, there will be no more death. We will be united fully with Christ and we will live with him forever and ever in the new heaven and the new earth. So explain God's good design, talk about corruptions, and then put the focus where it really should be, on God's good design for us forever when Jesus returns. So that would be my encouragement to you there, because I know that when I was teaching and we would talk about certain things, I had some students, even at a private school, that did come from situations. I had, one student that his parents were both drug addicts and they were not married and he was living with his grandparents. And so sometimes he would just bring up things, that his parents had done or his parents had said. And my response, always was to say, I know that is hard. Sin does corrupt God's good design, but isn't it so amazing that we know that when Jesus returns, God's good design for us will last forever? So that's where I would try to point it to. Okay, I'm going to try to get to a few more questions here. What about when beloved Aunt Sally marries Mary? How would you talk about that? Yes. So when you already set up that, you can't start off by talking about Aunt Sally marrying Mary, because if you're doing that, you're being reactive rather than proactive. You first have to start with laying out the positive biblical theology. And that's why we have to do this before our kids are even exposed to anything, so that then they have that foundation, so to talk about, okay, what is God's good design for marriage love? It's one man and one woman becoming one flesh for life. What else do we know about this? We know it's a picture of Jesus and the church. And then we can talk about, what? When we go to Thanksgiving, you're going to see Aunt Sally there with a woman named Mary, because Aunt Sally, she had a ceremony and she says that she's now married to this woman, Mary. And then we can talk about, is this God's good design for marriage? No, it's not. Aunt Sally has allowed her feelings to trick her. She is not following God's good design. She's rejecting and ignoring that good design. And so to talk about that, then something we do in God's good design curriculum exactly for situations like this, we explain to kids 3 things that they need to do when they encounter deviations from God's good design. 1, recognize it's not God's good design. 2, in their minds, remind themselves of the truth. And 3, be kind. And so we tell them in their minds, in these kind of situations, remind yourself, God designed marriage to be one man and one woman becoming one flesh for life. God's design is so good. And then be kind and treat that person as you would any other person. So we can tell our kids, okay, so we're going to see Aunt Sally and we're going to see Mary there at Thanksgiving. Are they following God's good design? Nope. Is it your job as a child to tell them that? Nope, it's not. So what are we going to do when we see Aunt Sally and Mary? That's right. We're going to be kind to them, just like we are to all of our other aunts. And so that's how I would handle that situation. It is 2:00 my time. I guess it's 1 p.m. Central. So we're on the hour. So to be respectful of people's time, please feel free to go if you need to. I am going to answer one more question. You're free to watch it if you want to stay. If not, the recording for this will be sent out within the next day or 2. So thank you so much for joining me. But I'm going to try to get to one more question. At our play group, the boys like to play dress up with dresses. Until what age would you say it's okay to let boys play dress up in dresses just as free play? Yeah, as you're saying, they're just doing this just to have fun and to be creative. I would say, I'm trying to think like if there's like an exact age that you can put on this. I think probably around the age of 7. That's when kids transition from very, very imaginative play into less imaginative, more creative play. And so I would say if I were the parent, I would probably put the kibosh on that around age 7, just to say, you know what, you're 7 or you're 8 now, and we're not going to play dress up anymore. That was something that you had fun with when you were really little, but we're not going to play dress up anymore now. And also just keep an eye on what they're doing. Boys playing dress up with dresses, in the past has been very innocent. Now it can definitely be taken a different way. Just be careful, about the other, parents that are in this group and what they're encouraging, what the boys are saying and what they're doing, and then how long they're doing this. Are they spending hours and hours in dresses pretending they're girls? That's different than, they spend 10 minutes in a dress and then they move on to Legos or, to jumping on the trampoline or something else. So I guess that's not like a hard and fast rule. I think that's like a general guideline sometime around the age of 7, when just naturally, like when I taught 3rd grade, most of my students were 8. And my girls would not, I didn't have a dress up plate station in my room, because like the girls weren't dressing up like princesses anymore. That's just something usually around the age of 6 or 7 that they just stop doing, just with where they are developmentally. And so I think developmentally, dress up in general around the age of 7, is when you stop that. So yeah, so that's what I encourage you to do. Also, just whenever it's a very personal question like this, not that this is super personal, but I think it has a lot to do with the temperament of the child and, the other families that are involved in this. Always encourage people to go to the elders at their church to ask for advice, because your elders know you, or should know you. If they don't, they should know you in a way that I could never possibly know you, just through the screen. So that would be my encouragement for you there. Well, thank you so much for giving up an hour of your day today to talk through these things. I know that these are some hot button cultural issues. Just know that as you go forth and you're working with the kids that God has placed in your care, we here at Foundation Worldview, we're praying for you. We want to be able to support you. And we're so grateful that you are being intentional with the discipling the children that God has placed in your care. I'll see you next time.